Mr. President, tomorrow at 2:15 or shortly thereafter, we'll be voting on the Child Care Development Block Grant of 2014. I want to take a few minutes and explain why it's important and to whom it's important, and why it's time to end debate on the Child Care Development Block Grant and actually vote up or down on whether we want to turn it into a law. When I talk about why it's important, I think of a young woman I've mentioned on the floor of the Senate from Memphis who attended Lemoyne College. She had a young child, one at that time. She was able to qualify for a voucher from the state of Tennessee with these federal dollars. There are about 21,000 families like her, and she was able to get $500 or $600 a month in order to provide daycare for her child while she got a business degree from Lemoyne College. The good news is that now she is an assistant manager at Walmart. She got her degree. She has 2 children, and she's able to pay for her own child care without help from the federal government. This is exactly the kind of legislating that we should be doing at the federal level. Questions often come up, well, what's the appropriate role for the federal government on an issue like child care? The answer this bill gives, and it's a bipartisan bill with strong support on both sides of the aisle, is that we should enable this young mother and 21,000 other families in Tennessee to take a voucher with federal dollars, maybe $500 or $600 a month, choose their own child care center for that child, and while going to school or working, put themselves on their own 2 feet. It's been an enormously successful program. It's worked for over 20 years. It was inaugurated in the administration of George H.W. Bush. At the time, there was a Democratic Congress, so it's a bipartisan result. And it follows the example of other successful federal programs by enabling American families to help themselves. We follow the same model when we deal with federal grants and loans for colleges. Last year, the presiding officer will remember, we had an agreement in this body on huge changes to the student loan program. President Obama became involved in it, Secretary Arne Duncan. We had a bipartisan working group on both sides of the aisle. The Republican House of Representatives came along, and we basically created new rules for the $100 billion of loans that the federal government gives or makes to students every year so they can continue their education. We put a market-based pricing system on it. It was revenue neutral to the taxpayers, and it had the effect in that year of lowering the interest rates on student loans to undergraduates by about 0.5%, cutting it nearly in half. We followed that model ever since the GI Bill for Veterans was passed in 1944, taking the federal dollars available, creating scholarships or vouchers for students. They then choose among, the veterans in that case, could choose among Notre Dame, University of New Mexico, University of Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Yeshiva, wherever they wanted to go to an accredited college, and that's worked very well. Maybe the most successful piece of social legislation ever passed. And the Child Care Development Block Grant is a good example of that as well. It's a perfect example of the government working as an enabler instead of a mandator. It spends $5.3 billion on child care for children under the age of 13 with plenty of flexibility. While it has bipartisan support from a Republican point of view, we like especially the block grants to states, that's flexibility, and the vouchers to parents, that's choices for parents, and that's worked very well. It's a model I hope we continue. That's the importance of the bill to everyday families in Tennessee and across this country. The other question is it time to end debate on the bill? That's what we're voting about. We call it cloture, which is a mystifying word, but all we're saying is that we've talked about it enough and that at least 60 of us believe it's time to end the debate and vote yes or no. Have we all had our say? Well, let's ask that question. Senator Harkin, Senator Mikulski, Senator Burr have worked on this for several years, as well as several others of us. It was approved 1 year ago by the Senate Health, Education, and Labor and Pensions Committee on a bipartisan basis. Then in March of this year, 2014, the bill was debated and discussed over a 2-day period. Now, we've had a lot of discussion in the Senate about whether we get to offer amendments. That concern has come from the senator who is presiding today. That concern has come from me. It's come from the senator from Oklahoma who is here. We're here to have our say. It's not easy to come to the United States Senate. It's not easy to stay here. And once we're here, we like to have our say, whether it's the Keystone Pipeline or Child Care Development Block Grant. Well, in this case, senators had their say. In fact, we had a model process for amendments. The Child Care Development Block Grant, having gone through committees in the Senate, having gone through committees in the House, came to the Senate floor in March, on March the 12th, and it was brought to the floor by unanimous consent. There was no motion for cloture at the beginning. There was no filling of the tree. We said anyone who's got an amendment that has something to do with the Child Care Block Grant, bring it on in. 50 senators offered 50 different amendments. Then we considered and agreed to 18 of those amendments on the Senate floor, 4 by recorded vote, 4 by voice vote. Senator Enzi and Landrieu and Franken and Coburn and Boxer, and 2 more for Landrieu, and 1 for Lee and Bennett and Portman and Tester. Scott, Thune, Bennett, Warren, Vitter, Sanders, Portman all had amendments to this bill. They were allowed to offer them. They were allowed to speak on them, and they were either voted on or accepted. And then it was passed by the Senate. Then it went to the House of Representatives, who considered it some more, and they've sent it back to us. The only changes that they made were done in consideration with the ranking members of the Senate committee that dealt with it. So here we've got about as good a process as we're ever going to have in the Senate. Through the committees, not out of the back door somewhere, all in the light of day, no cloture votes forced, no filling of the tree, amendments offered by anyone who wanted to, and then we went on till today. So I think part of the reason for this is because all of us value early childhood education. The other part is because we've had a good process. So I think it's only fair to say it's time to stop talking and vote on the Child Care Development Block Grant tomorrow at 2:15. I ask our colleagues on both sides of the aisle to vote for it. And I'd like to conclude with just one personal word. All of us, I think, support the idea of early childhood education. I'm an early learner. My mother had one of the 2 early school, preschool education programs in our county in Tennessee when I grew up. It was in a converted garage in our backyard. She had 24 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in the morning and 25 5-year-olds in the afternoon. My children couldn't imagine a single mother dealing with that many children all at one time, but she did, and she had nowhere to put me except in those schools, so I was in kindergarten for 5 years. I may be the only United States senator who can say that. But I had drummed into me from the earliest days the importance of early childhood education by both my mother and my father. Many of us have had that same experience. We have different ways of trying to get to that goal, but this legislation, the Child Care Development Block Grant, provides $5.3 billion to families across the country, mainly mothers, who are going to school so they can get a job, or who are working so they can do like the young woman in Memphis I talked about, stand on their own 2 feet, pay their own child care bills, but this helps them get started. So it's an important bill. I congratulate Senators Harkin and Burr and Mikulski, especially for their hard work on this. I'm forgetting some senator. Who's this? Isaacson, I think. Well, particularly those 3, Harkin, Mikulski, and Burr. And I urge my colleagues tomorrow afternoon to vote yes on ending debate on cloture for the Child Care Development Block Grant. I yield the floor, Mr. President.